Hey, you finally found what you were looking for. As you listen to my voice and feel the gentle frequencies in the background, you'll notice your body beginning to sink deeper into your bed. Each breath slower, each muscle softer, and with every word, your thoughts become quieter. You can let go now. You can rest. This is your journey. Welcome to Dreams of Duty. Now, before we begin this journey, take a moment just to breathe. Breathe in slowly. Feel the air fill your chest and breathe out, letting everything go. Again, breathe in and breathe out. Each time, a little deeper, a little calmer. With every breath, your body softens, your thoughts drift further away, and the world outside becomes distant and quiet. You are safe here. You are calm. You are ready to dream. It is March 5th, 1944. The ocean lies beneath a bruised sky, heavy and endless, its slow pulse rolling against the steel hull of a predator. Somewhere deep in the mid-Atlantic, a German U-boat, U-66, drifts in near silence. Inside, the air is thick with oil, sweat, and the metallic tang of machinery that hasn't slept in weeks. In the narrow control room, red lamps flicker across the faces of tired men. Captain Gerhard Seehausen leans over the periscope, his voice steady but low. Fire. A muffled thud. Then, through the periscope, a cargo ship erupts in flame. The water blooms orange, and a wave of heat and smoke ripples across the sea. The crew exhales as one. A hit, their fourth in this patrol. 4 ships sunk in just a few days. For a moment, pride swells in the cramped steel coffin. Then silence again. Only the hum of the engines and the slow drip of condensation echo through the hull. U-66 is one of the most feared hunters of the Atlantic. 36 ships already rest at the bottom because of her. 200,000 tons of cargo lost to the deep. But each victory has drawn more eyes and more vengeance from the skies above. Far to the west, the USS Buckley, a lean and restless destroyer escort, cuts through the waves under a pale dawn. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel, stands on the bridge, binoculars in hand. He's young, confident, but not reckless. A message crackles through the static. U-boat attack reported. Grid reference 03, 56 north 07, 36 east. Task group ordered to sweep the area. If used today on the demolitions and the roll. Abel's jaw tightens. Reply, we copy. Engines full steam ahead. Maintain heading 150. The Buckley surges forward, her engines roaring like an awakened beast. Another hunt has begun. Below the waves, in the darkness, Seehausen studies a torn map on his table. His finger traces the lines of the Atlantic, like veins on a hand. We will hunt here, he says, his tone clipped and certain. His men nod weary, obedient. But deep down, Even the captain knows their luck is fading. Fuel is low, torpedoes fewer still, and their resupply rendezvous, somewhere west of Africa, is long overdue. That night, the U-boat surfaces to breathe. The conning tower rises through black waves, the stars mirrored across the sea. Seehausen stands in the cold wind, coat collar high, scanning the horizon. Nothing still? Nothing from the lookout, sir. They're late, he mutters. They circle slowly, the engines growling, their wake a pale scar across the moonlit water. The men wait restless, silent. Hours pass, then faint, but unmistakable the sound of an engine. High above, Flugzeug, the cry tears through the sub. Alarms blare. Boots thunder down the corridors. Men to battle stations. Alarm. The captain looks up and sees it. A black silhouette. Descending through the clouds, an American TBM Avenger. Inside its cockpit, Lieutenant Jimmy J. Sellers peers down through binoculars. A dark line cuts through the waves. That's no island. That's a submarine, he whispers. Hold fire, his co-pilot says. Maybe it hasn't seen us. In Greature and Bland End. But the U-boat's deck gun begins to move slowly, deliberately. It saw us, Sellers mutters, and radio clicks to life. Contact confirmed. U-boat sighted. Sending coordinates. Aboard the Buckley, 20 miles away, the message arrives. Abel leans forward, eyes sharp. They found it. Likely the same one that hit those freighters last week. Gentlemen, that's our target. Prepare for battle. Engines to flank speed. The destroyer comes alive. Klaxons wail. Sailors run to their stations. The ocean stretches out ahead, vast and black. 40 minutes later, the radar pings. Detection. Bearing 335, 14,000 yards. Abel scans the horizon, but sees only darkness. He lowers his binoculars and glances west. The moon sits low, casting a long silver road across the water. He gets an idea. Heading 340, he orders. Let's put that sub in the moonlight. In the U-boat, the lookout's voice cracks through the calm. Ship. South. What kind? Unknown. Too dark. Should we hail them? Negative. Maintain stealth. Passive sonar only. The two ships move toward each other, silent, unaware how close they already are. On Buckley's bridge, Abel finally spots it. A small, dark shape gliding into the moon's reflection. He tightens his jaw. Steady, steady. Fire! Seehausen shouts below. The torpedo leaves its tube with a hiss, slicing into the sea. Seconds later, boom! A geyser of water erupts beside the destroyer's bow. It missed, just barely. Abel doesn't hesitate. Open fire. All guns. 20 millimeters, 40 millimeters, and 3-inch cannons roar in unison. Tracer rounds carve white streaks across the night. They hammer into the U-boat's deck, shattering steel and splintering railings. The submarine lurches under the assault, its men clinging to the guns, returning fire through smoke and chaos. But their aim is wild. The Americans are relentless. Check fire, Abel yells. The moon disappears behind clouds. There's no sense wasting ammunition blind. Below, the Germans scramble to reload. Men carry the wounded below deck, stepping over blood and spent shells. The captain knows this is their only chance. AA guns open fire. We fight until the end. Flashes of light rip through the sea air. The smell of cordite, smoke, and burning oil fills the conning tower. Bullets ricochet off the steel deck. Sparks rain into the waves. The U-66 turns sharply, trying to evade, but the Buckley follows like a predator in perfect rhythm. Heading 210, Seehausen orders, "Fire last torpedo." It's their final card. The torpedo launches a streak of white bubbles in the Black Sea. "Torpedo starboard bow!" A sailor screams from Buckley's sonar. "Rudder full starboard!" Abel shouts. The ship groans under the strain as it turns hard. The torpedo slices past a miss. Gasps of relief echo across the deck. Below, Seehausen's heart sinks. Their last weapon is gone. The sea roars outside, angry, endless. He knows what must come next. "Abandon ship, sir." That's an order. Some men refuse to move. Others cry silently as they climb the ladder. The first splash breaks the night. One by one, they leap into the freezing water. But Abel doesn't know they're abandoning ship. To him, it's still a threat. "Ram it," he orders. The Buckley surges forward, its bow rising over the waves, and slams into the submarine with a sound like thunder. Metal grinds against metal. Sparks fly. The two vessels lock impossibly side by side. And then chaos erupts. Germans, desperate and defiant, climb onto Buckley's deck. "Stand by to repel boarders." Abel shouts words not heard in a century. Pistols, wrenches, even coffee mugs become weapons. The deck explodes in gunfire and screams. Moments later, grenades arc through the night. Then a flash so bright, it silences the world. When the smoke clears, U-66 is gone. Only the smell of oil and fire drifts across the sea. USS Buckley circles the wreckage for hours, pulling survivors from the water. 36 men live. Their captain, Gerhard Seehausen, age 26, goes down with his ship. Commander Brent Abel stands on the deck, soaked and exhausted. The sea is calm again. Stars glimmer faintly through the fading smoke. He exhales slow, heavy. The radio operator's voice cuts through the quiet. "No losses, sir. All hands accounted for." Abel looks out into the darkness. Somewhere beneath the waves, U-66 lies broken, its engines forever silent. He removes his cap. "God rest them," he whispers. "All of them. March 5, 1944. The last hunt of U-66. Of her 62-man crew, only 36 survived. Commander Abel was awarded the Navy Cross for his leadership, and the U-boat war, once the terror of the Atlantic, was now fading into history. The dawn came quietly over the Seto Inland Sea. Mist drifted above the calm surface, like breath held by the world itself. From the distance, the island of Otsushima emerged small, silent, and wrapped in secrecy. This was where the Khitan pilots were forged. The island looked peaceful from afar. pine trees clinging to the rocks, gulls circling over quiet bays. But inside its hidden coves, men learned how to die. Lieutenant Sekio Nishina stood at the edge of the dock, the wind tugging gently at his uniform. He watched the steel cylinder in front of him, 12 meters long, painted black, the shape of a torpedo, but with a cockpit built into its head. A machine built for one man. A machine with no return. "Sir, permission to begin training," a young voice said behind him. Nishina turned. It was Ensign Ono, barely 21, his face pale with exhaustion and salt. The boy had arrived 3 days ago, still carrying the smell of his mother's letter inside his pocket. Nishina nodded slowly. "Permission granted. Remember what I told you. The ocean forgives no hesitation." Ono bowed deeply, his body trembling as he climbed into the Kaiten mock-up, a training hull fixed to the pier. Inside, the air was thick and smelled of oil and metal. The instructors closed the hatch with a dull thud. Only a small glass window remained, reflecting the gray morning light. From inside came muffled breathing. The boy's hand moved to the controls. Each lever had been polished smooth by others before him, men who had vanished into the Pacific. Nishina's voice echoed through the intercom. "Imagine you are already dead. Only then can you strike without fear." The propeller began to spin slowly. Bubbles rose from the stern as the training torpedo slid forward, then stopped at the end of its guide rail. Above the surface, gulls screamed. Hours passed. The pilots rotated through the simulators, breathing stale air, memorizing every valve, every gauge, every last procedure of their one-way journey. They practiced shutting the hatch alone. They practiced cutting the oxygen feed. They practiced aiming through the periscope toward a wooden silhouette of an enemy ship painted on the horizon. When night fell, the instructors gathered them in a dim barrack, lit by kerosene lamps. A banner hung across the wall. "One life for 10 ships." The men sat cross-legged, writing their farewell letters. Ono's hand shook as he wrote, "Mother, do not weep for me. I go where the sea calls, and my name will ride the waves forever." Outside, the cicadas sang their last song of summer. The sound mixed with the hum of the generators and the low murmur of the tide. In the distance, a submarine engine coughed to life the I-47, preparing for another trial dive. Nishina watched from the dock, hands behind his back. He had once been a dreamer, an engineer, a believer in progress and precision. Now he was a priest, guiding young souls into the dark. He whispered to himself, "If only the Emperor could see their faces." The stars came out above the island, sharp and cold. In the distance, faint lights flickered under the surface reflections from the test runs below. Each shimmer in the water was a heartbeat, a breath, a human life turning into a weapon. At midnight, the sea fell silent again. The training was over for the day. One of the chitin hulls had flooded during the final run. The instructor marked it calmly in his notebook. One fatality. Nishina stood alone by the pier, the waves lapping softly against the wood. He looked down at the black water and saw the reflection of the stars scatter across it like broken glass. The night whispered, "Soon." The men of Otsushima slept in narrow bunks, dreaming of mothers, of girls left behind, of endless sky. But the sea was awake, waiting for them. The morning broke heavy with fog. From the cliffs of Otsushima, the world below looked like a painting done in shades of ash. The sea was still, almost sacred. A bell rang through the mist, slow, hollow, and deliberate. It was the sound of departure orders. Lieutenant Sekio Nishina stood before his men on the parade ground. 20 faces, pale and calm, stared back at him. Each wore a white headband, with the rising sun painted in the center, the mark of the Tokotai, the Special Attack Corps. Behind them, the Kaiten torpedoes gleamed faintly under tarps lined up like coffins waiting for the tide. Nishina's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight of what he carried. "Today, you leave the shore," he said quietly. "You are not to think of yourselves as men of flesh. You are the embodiment of the Empire's will, and the ocean will carry your names longer than any monument." The men bowed deeply. No one spoke. Only the wind answered, moving softly across the grass. Ono, the youngest, felt his heart thumping beneath his uniform. He remembered his mother's hands when she had said goodbye, how she had smiled so hard her lips trembled. He clutched the small amulet she had given him and hid it beneath his flight jacket. As they marched toward the pier, the fog began to lift. The silhouettes of submarines emerged. I-36, I-47, I-53, silent beasts of steel, waiting to swallow their human cargo. Each kaiten was loaded with care, bolted to its release cradle along the submarine's deck. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and burning incense. Priests in white robes chanted softly, waving purifying wands of paper over the pilots as they passed. Each man stopped to bow before a small altar, where a photo of the emperor rested beside a candle. When Ono reached the altar, he hesitated only for a moment. He whispered, barely audible, "Please, let it mean something." The candle flickered. By midday, the loading was complete. The men stood lined up along the dock as the submarine crews saluted. The water around them shimmered under the pale light, calm and unknowing. The order came from command: prepare to submerge. Destination: Ulithi Atoll. It was the first time the kaiten would be used in a real operation. No longer an experiment. No longer theory. As the hatches closed, the sound of metal locking against metal echoed like a heartbeat. The deck grew silent. Nishina stepped aboard last, his boots ringing against the steel. He turned once, looking back toward the island, the pine trees, the barracks, the empty horizon. A voice inside him whispered, "This is what you built." He pushed it away. Inside the submarine, the air was thick and close. Men moved quietly through narrow corridors, their faces dim in the red emergency lights. The kaiten pilots sat near their machines, each lost in thought. One wrote a final line in his notebook: "If I return, it will be as foam." The engines rumbled to life. A low vibration filled the hull as the submarine slipped beneath the surface, the daylight fading to gray and then to black. For a long moment, there was only silence. The ocean closed over them completely. Somewhere above, the gulls cried, and then the sea erased even that. The ocean stretched endlessly, a black mirror swallowing the horizon. Beneath it, 200 feet under the waves, the submarine I-47 crept westward through the dark. Its hull groaned softly as pressure pressed against the steel skin. Every sound, a creak, a drip, a shifting bolt, felt alive. Inside, the air was thick with oil, sweat, and the faint metallic scent of machinery. Condensation rolled down the bulkheads, dripping like rain in a hollow cave. Fans hummed weakly, their blades choked with salt. Lieutenant Sekio Nishina sat alone in the command room, the dim red lights painting his face in shadow. His fingers rested on a map spread across the table. Tiny pencil marks traced their route from Japan's shores toward the Central Pacific, a vast graveyard now watched over by Allied patrols. Each mark was a heartbeat closer to death. He could hear the steady rhythm of the diesel engines through the deck plates. It was hypnotic, like the slow breathing of a sleeping monster. Chief Engineer Sato entered quietly. "Engines holding steady, sir, but we're burning fuel faster than expected. The pressure valves still not sealing properly." Nishina looked up. "Can we make Ulithi?" Sato hesitated. "If we're not forced to dive deep again, maybe." Nishina nodded. "Then we won't dive unless the gods demand it." Sato gave a thin smile. "Then we better hope they're asleep." They both laughed, but softly, as if afraid the ocean might hear. In the forward compartment, Kaiten pilots sat in silence near their steel coffins. Each torpedo gleamed in the dim light, long, sleek, terrifyingly beautiful. Inside each of them, a cockpit had been fitted small, cold, barely large enough for a man to sit and die. Pilot Ono traced his fingers over the painted characters on his kaiten side. Fujin, the god of wind. He had named it himself. His friend Takahashi, sitting cross-legged beside him, whispered, "Do you think we'll see them before the attack?" Ono blinked. "The Americans? No. The souls of those who went before us." Ono said nothing. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft hum of machinery and the ticking of a bulkhead clock. A single droplet fell from a pipe overhead, landing on Takahashi's hand. He stared at it, then smiled faintly. "It's like the sea is already touching us." Hours turned to days. The submarine moved slowly through currents and shadows. Sometimes, distant explosions rolled through the water faint, muffled booms that made the hull tremble. Depth charges, but far away. For now, the men barely spoke anymore. They moved like ghosts through the narrow passageways, eating in silence, sleeping with the engine's heartbeat in their ears. One night, Nishina ordered the submarine to surface. They rose slowly, the hull creaking, until at last, the bow broke the surface and moonlight spilled across the deck. The night sky was a cathedral of stars. For the first time in weeks, the crew breathed fresh air. Nishina stood on the conning tower, staring out at the horizon. The ocean was endless, a silver plain beneath the moon. He could almost believe there was peace in it. Beside him, Ono climbed up quietly. "Permission to stand watch, sir." "Granted." They stood together for a long time, saying nothing. The wind was gentle, and for a fleeting moment, both forgot where they were headed. Then, Faintly in the distance, a glow appeared on the horizon. Nishina's eyes narrowed. Ship lights? The lookout confirmed. Bearing 042. Multiple contacts. The tranquility vanished like a breath in cold air. Crash dive! Nishina shouted. Alarms blared through the narrow steel corridors. The crew leapt into action. Hatches slammed, vents sealed, gauges spun as seawater poured into the ballast tanks. The submarine plunged beneath the waves again, swallowed whole by the dark. Inside, the noise faded to nothing. Only the slow hiss of compressed air remained. They sank to 180 feet. Silent running, Nishina ordered. The men froze in place. No one moved. No one breathed too loud. Even the air seemed to hold still. Minutes crawled into hours. Through the periscope, Nishina could see the faint silhouettes of destroyers passing above the guardians of an American convoy. He could almost feel their propellers pulsing through the water. Ono, down by the chitin, clutched his amulet tight. He whispered the same words over and over. Not a prayer, not a plea, just a promise. Soon I will join the sea. When the destroyers were gone, the crew exhaled in quiet relief. The tension eased, but only slightly. Sato checked the instruments and frowned. Sir, pressure in ballast tanks rising again. The seals are failing. Nishina looked toward the ceiling, where condensation dripped like sweat. How long until we need repairs? Sato sighed. We don't have the tools for repairs. Silence filled the room again. Nishina finally said, quietly, then we pray the ocean forgives us. The submarine continued west, toward Ulithi, toward the unknown. Every mile carried them deeper into both the Pacific and their destiny. Outside, the dark pressed close, heavy, eternal, waiting. The ocean began to change. At first, it was only the wind, a restless whisper brushing over the waves. Then came the swell, long, heavy rolls that made the steel hull groan like a creature in pain. The I-47 had been submerged for nearly 36 hours since their narrow escape from the convoy. Supplies were dwindling. The air inside had grown warm, stale, thick with the scent of fuel and fear. Lieutenant Sekio Nishina stood in the control room, one hand braced against the chart table as the submarine tilted from side to side. A dull clang echoed through the hull with each roll. Outside, the Pacific had turned from black to bruised gray. Surface. We need air. The command rose like a prayer. Compressed air hissed through the vents. Ballast tanks emptied, and the vessel slowly lifted upward. When the periscope broke the surface, a wave immediately crashed over it, slapping the steel with brutal force. Moments later, the submarine surfaced, but the sea was no longer welcoming. Gale winds howled across the deck, tearing at the crew as they emerged for air. Rain lashed their faces. Thunder rolled over the horizon like the footsteps of gods. Nishina gripped the conning tower rail. Secure the hatches. Keep the vents clear. The men obeyed, fighting the wind as they latched down every opening. The waves rose higher and higher, massive walls of water that made even the great submarine seem small. Pilot Ono stumbled across the slick metal deck, clutching a cable for balance. Salt spray stung his eyes. He could barely see the horizon anymore, only endless gray and foam. Suddenly, lightning split the sky. For one terrible moment, the world was pure white, and in that flash, Ono saw it. A massive wave, taller than a house, bearing down on them. "Brace!" someone shouted. The sea struck with all its fury. The submarine rolled hard to port, throwing men against the railings. Water surged over the deck, tearing loose anything not bolted down. The vessel shuddered, screaming like a wounded animal. Nishina was nearly thrown from the tower, but he held on, teeth clenched. "Dive! Dive now!" The klaxon sounded, muffled by the storm. Men scrambled back into the hatches, one by one disappearing into the steel belly below. The last to descend was Nishina, soaked, trembling, but composed. As the hatches sealed and the submarine began to sink beneath the raging waves, the thunder faded to a dull, distant roar. Darkness swallowed them again. But it was not the peaceful dark they had known before. It was alive, angry, pressing, crushing, endless. Inside, the men sat drenched and shivering. The lights flickered as the batteries strained against the storm's pull. Every few seconds, a new groan ran along the hull, the sound of pressure and time grinding against steel. Chief Engineer Sato stared at the gauges, jaw tight. Water in the aft compartment, flooding through the shaft seal. "Can it be contained?" Nishina asked. Sato hesitated. "Maybe." Ono and two others rushed to help, hauling pumps and sealing gear through the narrow corridors. They worked in silence, their movements mechanical, desperate. Each drop of seawater that spilled in seemed to whisper, "You do not belong here." Hours passed. The storm outside raged without mercy. The submarine rocked endlessly, every movement a violent jolt. Men vomited from the motion. Others fainted from exhaustion. In the forward compartment, the Kaiten pilots sat beside their torpedoes, whispering to themselves in the dark. Takahashi spoke softly. "Maybe the sea doesn't want us to fight. Maybe it's warning us." Ono looked up from where he sat, eyes hollow. "The sea doesn't care. It only takes." A pause. Only the hum of the engines filled the silence. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the hull, a sharp metallic snap. The men froze. The submarine listed slightly. Sato's voice came over the intercom, tense. "Starboard trim tanks are failing. We're losing balance." "Counterflood!" Nishina barked. The crew scrambled, redirecting ballast. Valves hissed, pipes rattled. But the sea outside was stronger. The submarine tilted again, groaning as though it might tear apart. For a full minute, everyone waited, hearts pounding as the deck creaked and the bulkheads bent. Then, slowly, mercifully, the pressure evened out. A collective breath filled the room. Later, as calm returned, Nishina walked the length of the vessel. Everywhere he went, men were slumped in exhaustion. Some whispered prayers, others simply stared at the floor. When he reached the forward section, he found Ono sitting beside his kaiten, staring at the small wooden amulet in his hand. "You should rest," Nishina said quietly. Ono shook his head. "How do you rest when you know where we're going?" Nishina said nothing. He looked at the torpedo, at its polished casing, the small window where a pilot would look out in his final moments. "The storm is over," he said finally. "But it's not done with us." Ono looked up. "You mean the sea?" Nishina's eyes were distant. "No, I mean the silence." When the submarine surfaced again the next morning, the storm was gone. The ocean was eerily calm, a vast field of glass under a pale gray sky. Not a single wave moved. Even the gulls were gone. It was beautiful and terrifying. For the first time, the men realized how alone they truly were. The I-47 drifted west, toward Ulithi, and into the waiting mouth of destiny. The sea was calm, too calm. No wind, no waves, no sound, but the steady hum of the engines and the slow heartbeat of the ocean itself. The I-47 slid through the water like a phantom. Above them, the surface shimmered faintly with the pale light of the moon. Below them, only darkness, endless, infinite darkness. In the control room, Captain Gerhard Seehausen's Japanese counterpart, Lieutenant Sekio Nishina, stood beside the plotting table, his face lit by the faint green glow of the navigation lamps. Before him, on the map, a small circle marked their destination, Ulithi Atoll, the beating heart of the American Pacific Fleet. Hundreds of ships, aircraft carriers, destroyers, supply vessels, all gathered in a lagoon vast enough to hide an army. And tonight, the I-47 would find it. "Depth reading?" Nishina asked quietly. 80 meters, sir." "Sound?" "Clear. No propellers." He nodded. "Maintain course 120. Periscope depth in 20 minutes." The crew moved in silence. Every step, every click of a valve, every whisper seemed amplified by the stillness. Even the ocean itself seemed to listen. In the forward section, the Kaiten pilots sat in a circle. 4 young men. 4 living weapons. Ensign Kuroda, the youngest, held his helmet in both hands, tracing the white-painted Kanji Yamato no Tamashii spirit of Japan. He was barely 20. His hands trembled. Beside him sat Ono, staring at the floor. The wooden amulet his sister had given him lay on the table, its edges worn smooth by endless touch. "Are you afraid?" Kuroda asked softly. Ono looked up. "Yes." He didn't try to hide it. "I think only fools aren't afraid." Kuroda gave a faint smile. "I dreamed last night. I saw a great wave. It was beautiful, but it swallowed everything." Ono said nothing. From the darkness near the hatch, Takahashi spoke quietly. "Maybe that's not a dream. Maybe it's a promise." The words lingered in the air, part prophecy, part curse. Back in the control room, Nishina lowered the periscope slowly. The eyepiece glistened with condensation. "Report. Multiple radar contacts to the northeast, sir. Faint but large." He nodded. "That's them." The atmosphere changed immediately. The quiet hum of duty became a tense electric silence. On the chart, Nishina drew a small cross where the contacts had appeared. Distance approximately 16 nautical miles. "We'll wait until nightfall." The order rippled through the submarine. Engines slowed. Lights dimmed further. The I-47 became still, drifting like a dark memory beneath the waves. Hours passed. The men ate in silence a thin soup, a few hard biscuits. Conversation had become rare, almost forbidden. Every man was alone with his thoughts. In the torpedo room, the mechanics worked with deliberate calm, preparing the kaitens for launch. Each man checked the seals, the batteries, the ignition system. The metallic clicking echoed softly, like the ticking of a clock counting down to fate. Lieutenant Nishina entered quietly, his footsteps barely audible on the steel floor. The men straightened and saluted. "At ease," he said softly. He placed his hand on the cold hull of one of the kaitens. It was smooth, freshly polished, the surface gleaming faintly under the red lights. He whispered more to himself than to anyone else. 4 torpedoes, 4 souls. He turned to the pilots. "You know what's expected of you. Once we reach the outer perimeter of Ulithi, you will be released in pairs. You will head toward the largest silhouettes, likely carriers. You must trust your instruments and yourselves." No one spoke. Later that night, as the submarine crept closer to Ulithi, the periscope rose again. The surface was quiet but far away. Faint lights glimmered on the horizon. At first, they looked like stars. Then, the periscope adjusted, and Nishina could see them for what they were: ship lights. Dozens of them, a floating city. He exhaled slowly. "The enemy sleeps in the light," he whispered. "We shall come to them from the dark." He ordered the engines to silent running. Speed, 3 knots. Depth, 20 meters. The submarine glided forward, barely disturbing the sea. Inside the small kaiten compartment, the pilots prepared in ritual silence. Ono carefully folded his letter, one final message to his sister, and placed it inside his uniform pocket. Kuroda whispered a prayer, his voice trembling. Takahashi tied his headband. The 4th man, Ensign Mori, simply stared at the small porthole on the side of his kaiten, watching faint bubbles drift past. His reflection looked ghost-like. He thought of home, the river behind his village, the plum trees in spring, the scent of wet soil after rain. He knew he would never see them again. At 2:10 a.m., the first red light blinked in the control room. Target range, 9,000 meters. Bearing steady. Prepare to launch kaiten units 1 and 2. The crew moved quickly. The sound of hydraulics filled the corridor as the outer hatches unlocked. Metal groaned against metal. Nishina stood in the narrow passage between the torpedo tubes. He saluted the 2 pilots as they climbed inside. Ono was the last to enter. As he sealed the hatch behind him, he looked back through the small window. Nishina raised his hand in silent respect. Flood outer tubes. Water surged around the steel. The gauges trembled. The final green light blinked on. Launch. A deep thum echoed through the submarine as the first 2 kaitens were released into the night. Their propellers spun to life, and they disappeared into the black water's silent, unstoppable, human-guided thunderbolts. Nishina closed his eyes for a moment. Then he turned to the crew. "Prepare the next 2. Outside, the sea remained calm. Only the faint vibration of distant engines could be felt, the sleeping heart of the American fleet. Within minutes, the last 2 kaitens were gone. 4 lights vanished into the abyss. 4 men vanished with them. In the control room, the sonar crackled softly. Then came a faint echo, a low, rhythmic pulse. Boom, boom, then silence. Everyone froze. Moments later, another pulse. Louder. Then 2 more, overlapping, deep and heavy. The sea trembled. The lights flickered. One of the officers looked up, voice shaking. "Sir, impact confirmed." Nishina said nothing. He looked at the chart, at the empty ocean around them, at the space where 4 lives had ended and dozens more far above. He finally whispered, "They have fulfilled their duty." The submarine turned slowly, beginning its long, silent journey home. But deep below the surface, the echoes of those explosions lingered, as if the ocean itself refused to forget. The explosions had faded long ago, but inside the I-47, they still echoed, faint, distant, like thunder trapped inside a dream. The submarine moved deeper, 100 meters, then 120. The sea pressed against the hull like a living thing, heavy and ancient. Metal creaked. Pipes hissed. The air was thick with the smell of oil and sweat and silence. No one spoke. Even the hum of the engines seemed subdued, as if afraid to disturb the ghosts that now drifted with them. Lieutenant Nishina sat alone in the control room. The dim red light painted his face in shadow. His hand rested on the chart table, a simple map, now meaningless. He looked at the ink marks he had drawn hours before. Targets, bearings, distances, all done with precision, all carried out flawlessly. And yet, it felt hollow. He removed his cap and set it down carefully beside the map. His reflection wavered in the glass of the depth gauge, eyes sunken, lips pale. The words he had said to his men returned to him. 4 torpedoes, 4 souls. Now, there was no sound, no pulse, only the slow rhythm of the hull breathing under pressure. In the crew quarters, the men lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. Each time one closed his eyes, he saw it again, the flash, the vibration, the unseen destruction blooming somewhere above. One man whispered, "Do you think they made it?" No one answered. Another muttered, "They said they'd aim for a carrier. Maybe they reached it." A third voice replied, quiet and distant, "Or maybe they just vanished." Silence returned. Only the steady ticking of a loose gauge filled the room, marking seconds that felt eternal. In the small compartment near the torpedo bay, Chief Engineer Nakamura sat with a cigarette between his fingers unlit. He turned it slowly, staring at the thin paper, the smell of tobacco still faintly sweet. He'd promised Kuroda, the youngest pilot, a smoke when they returned. He smiled bitterly. "Guess I'll owe you one, kid." He set the cigarette on a small metal shelf and left it there, a tiny shrine in a room of iron. Hours passed. Outside, the ocean grew darker. The I-47 glided through layers of silence so deep it felt as if sound itself had drowned. Then, suddenly, ping, a faint sonar pulse, distant but sharp. "Destroyer contact," someone whispered. All eyes turned to Nishina. He didn't flinch. "Hold course," he said calmly. "Silent running. No movement unless I say. When does not, The men froze where they stood. Breaths were held. No one dared to move. Another ping, closer this time. Sweat trickled down the side of Nishina's face. He closed his eyes, counting. 1 second, 2, 3. No explosion, no rush of propellers. Then silence again. The destroyer moved away. Minutes later, the sound was gone. The crew exhaled as one. It felt like being reborn. Hours later, as dawn began to creep through the sea above, Nishina ordered the submarine to surface. The hatch opened with a hiss. Cold morning air flooded in fresh, sharp reel. He climbed the ladder and stepped onto the deck. The sea stretched endlessly, pale blue under a sky washed in gold. No ships, no planes, only the horizon, clean, empty, silent. He inhaled deeply, the salt stinging his lungs. For a brief moment, he felt something like peace. But then, he saw the sun glinting on the waves, small ripples of light that looked like spirits dancing. He thought of the 4 men now gone beneath that same light. He whispered their names, one by one. Ono, Kuroda, Takahashi, Mori. Each name drifted into the wind, carried away across the water. Later that day, the men gathered on deck. No ceremony had been ordered, but the ritual formed on its own. They stood in a line, caps removed, heads bowed. Nishina held a small paper slip, the mission record. He tore it in half and let the pieces fall into the sea. "May the waves carry their honor," he said softly. The fragments drifted for a moment, then vanished beneath the swell. As night returned, the I-47 began her journey back toward Japan. The sky was clear, now countless stars reflected on the water's surface, as if the heavens themselves had descended into the sea. Nishina stood by the periscope one last time. He didn't look through it. He just rested his hand on the cold steel and whispered, "We are all chitin now, drifting toward our fate." The submarine slipped once more beneath the waves, swallowed by the deep, and behind her, the ocean closed, leaving no trace of what had passed. The I-47 approached the Japanese coast in silence. No triumphant music, no cheering crews. Only the slow churn of propellers under a pale, washed-out sky. The war had changed since they had left. Radio reports spoke not of victories, but of cities in ashes. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya. The empire was shrinking, and the sea that once carried glory now whispered defeat. In the conning tower, Lieutenant Sekio Nishina stared through his binoculars. The faint outline of land appeared at last, a dark, jagged shadow against the mist. "Land sighted, sir," came the voice from below. He didn't answer immediately. He just nodded, as though acknowledging something inevitable. After so many months at sea, Japan didn't feel like home anymore. It felt distant, foreign, a memory of something that used to matter. Below deck, the men packed in silence. No one spoke about the mission. No one dared to. Every face was pale, thinned by hunger, every movement slow and careful, as if afraid to wake the dead still clinging to their minds. In the galley, Chief Engineer Nakamura cleaned the same wrench over and over. He looked up when Nishina entered. "Sir," The men are asking. Will we report the attack? Nishina hesitated. Then quietly, yes, we will give the report. The truth. Nakamura nodded, but there was no relief in his eyes, only understanding. Truth could be heavier than lies. The submarine entered Kure Naval Base at dawn. No one waited for them at the dock. No band, no photographers, just a few officers in gray uniforms and a clerk with a clipboard. They saluted without looking the returning crew in the eyes. Then came the questions. Short, sharp, bureaucratic. How many ships sunk? 4 Kaiten launched? Success confirmed? Nishina replied mechanically. Yes, yes. Unconfirmed. Each answer felt like a nail being driven in. After the formalities, the men were dismissed. Most had nowhere to go. Their families lived hundreds of miles away or not at all anymore. Some wandered into the nearby town. Some stayed in the submarine, unable to leave her cold steel comfort. The I-47 herself was ordered to dry dock, to be inspected, refitted, and prepared for more suicide missions. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. That night, Nishina walked through the naval yard. The air smelled of rust, oil, and smoke from the distant city. He passed rows of ships, many half-sunk, many burned out. A group of mechanics worked quietly under floodlights, repairing what little could still fight. No one spoke of victory anymore, only of endurance. He stopped by a bulletin board where the latest war achievements were posted. Long lists of names, almost all marked with the same 2 kanji. Senses killed in action. He found 4 familiar ones there. Ono, Kuroda, Takahashi, Mori. He reached out and touched their names with his fingertips. The paper was damp with the night air. In the following days, Nishina was summoned to a small, dim office inside the base headquarters. 2 officers awaited him. Their uniforms were immaculate, their eyes cold. Lieutenant Nishina, one began, you led the Kaiten operation successfully? Yes, sir. You understand the honor your crew has brought to the Empire? I do, sir. There was a pause. The officer studied his face. Then why, he asked slowly, do you look like a man who lost? Nishina didn't answer. He just lowered his gaze. That evening, he returned to I-47 one last time. The ship was quiet now, her engines cold, her corridors empty. He walked through every compartment, touching the walls, the valves, the torpedo tubes. In the mess hall, someone had left the unlit cigarette on the table. Nakamura's promise. He smiled faintly. Then, from a pocket in his coat, he took 4 small paper cranes, folded from the mission reports he'd torn up at sea. He placed them gently on the steel surface and whispered, "You are home now." Outside, the wind picked up, blowing through the open hatch. It carried the faint sound of distant waves, and somewhere beyond them, the quiet hum of the living world moving on. Nishina stood on the dock as the sun rose, turning the water gold. He knew he would soon be sent out again. A new mission, a new sea, a new death to face. But for this one moment, he simply watched the light shimmer across the bay and thought, maybe the ocean remembers us. It was August 5th, 1945. when the orders came. The war was collapsing all around Japan. Cities were burning. Supply lines were gone. And yet, the I-47 was called once more. Captain Sekio Nishina gathered his crew in the cramped briefing room. Maps littered the table, showing the Pacific coastline, scattered islands, and allied shipping routes. "There is one final operation," he said. The men nodded, faces grim but resolute. No one smiled. No one needed to. The mission was simple in description, impossible in reality. A convoy of American ships, heavily escorted, was moving near Okinawa. Their objective: sink at least one vessel. Success would be a small ripple against the tide of the war. Failure would be total. Nishina walked slowly among the men, checking each station. "Are the torpedoes ready?" he asked. "Yes, sir," came the reply. "Silent running checked?" "Yes, sir." "Course plotted?" "Yes, sir." All ready. And yet, everyone felt the weight of the inevitable. The I-47 slipped into the water at 0300 hours, engines humming quietly. The night was black, heavy with heat, the kind that presses on your chest. Every man aboard knew this might be their last patrol. Nishina climbed into the control room. He adjusted the periscope, scanning the faint moonlight on the waves. The ocean seemed calm, deceptively calm. Hours passed in near silence. The crew moved efficiently, every motion practiced, every breath measured. Even the slightest mistake could mean death. Suddenly, the sonar officer whispered, "Contacts ahead, multiple targets, approaching fast." Nishina peered through the periscope. 4 large vessels, flanked by smaller escort ships. The Americans were cautious but alert. "Set course. Prepare torpedoes. We strike at dawn." The hours dragged as the submarine approached its prey. Nishina felt every second like an eternity. He thought of his friends Ono, Kuroda, Takahashi, Mori, all gone, all in the same silent sea that now carried him forward. At first light, the I-47 rose slightly, exposing the periscope. The targets were closer. Nishina signaled the torpedo officer. The torpedoes slid silently into their tubes, ready to fire. Then chaos. Aircraft appeared on the horizon, glinting in the morning sunday. The convoy was not alone. Anti-subplanes screamed toward them, dropping depth charges and flares. "Dive! Dive! Dive!" Nishina ordered. The submarine plummeted beneath the waves, water pressure crushing against the hull. Explosions rippled through the sea, shaking the vessel. The men held their positions, hands gripping rails, hearts pounding, faces pale. Through the periscope, Nishina watched the convoys scatter. The torpedoes fired one by one, each a chance at victory or nothing. He felt the familiar dread, the hum of the engines, the whisper of the ocean, the faint taste of salt on his lips. An explosion rocked the I-47. One of the escort ships had spotted the submarine. Depth charges rained down. The men held, each shock jarring them against the hull. Nishina's mind raced. We may not make it back, but if we die, we take them with us. Minutes stretched into hours. The submarine survived, but at a cost. Damage reports flew through the corridors. a flooded compartment, damaged periscope, one torpedo tube inoperable. Yet, they had succeeded. One American transport had been hit, flames licking the hull, smoke rising into the sky. A silent cheer ran through the crew. It was brief, fleeting. They knew the war was ending, and their lives were hanging by a thread. As dusk fell, the I-47 turned toward home. Nishina climbed onto the conning tower. The sun dipped behind the horizon, bleeding red into the waves. He thought of the men who would never return, of the oceans that claimed them all, of the silent sacrifice of hundreds of young pilots and sailors. And yet, there was a strange peace. The war might be lost, the empire in ruins, but for a brief moment, they had survived. The submarine moved steadily, cutting through the water like a shadow, heading toward the last stretch of their journey. Night descended. The stars shimmered on the black water. Nishina stood silently, hand resting on the cold steel of the hatch. The men around him whispered prayers, sang silent songs to the ocean, to the dead, to honor. He knew what tomorrow would bring, and he accepted it, because in the sea, in the deep, there was no judgment, only survival, only the quiet legacy of those who dared to face the impossible. It was August 15th, 1945, and the empire was crumbling. The radio crackled with the Emperor's voice, a surrender. A stunned silence filled every submarine, every ship, every town. For Lieutenant Seikyo Nishina, aboard the I-47, the words barely registered. The war was over, but the ocean did not care. The sea claimed no prisoners, honored no treaties. It simply kept moving, endlessly, as if mocking the fleeting struggles of men. The I-47 limped through the Pacific, engines humming quietly, battered but still afloat. The men moved silently, aware that the war had ended, but their lives had not yet begun again. Some stared at the water, some stared at each other. Some stared at nothing at all. Nishina climbed to the conning tower, staring at the horizon. The waves glimmered under the morning sun, each crest reflecting the pain and sacrifice of the past months. He thought of the missions, the Kaiten attacks, the submerged journeys, the fires, the explosions, the comrades lost. He thought of Hiroshi Kuroki, of Ono, Kuroda, Takahashi, Mori, and he whispered their names into the wind. The submarine reached Kure Naval Base once more. No orders, no fanfare, no cheering crowds, only the sound of the waves lapping against the steel hull. Nishina gave the final commands. Secure the torpedoes. Prepare the vessel for inspection. That is all. The crew moved slowly, methodically, aware that nothing more was required of them but survival. They had been spared. They had been tested, and the ocean had allowed them to live. Days passed. The I-47 was decommissioned. The war machines were dismantled. The vessels that had carried men to glory, to death, to nothing, were broken down for scrap. Nishina walked along the docks one last time. The smell of salt and diesel hung in the air. He saw young sailors laughing, children running along the piers, the quiet return of normalcy to a world that had been scorched. But for him, for the survivors of the I-47, the past remained. The ghosts of the ocean, the faces of friends, the weight of orders and failures, all were etched into memory. He found a quiet spot near the water and set down a small box. Inside were the ashes of Hiroshi Kuroki, his old friend and comrade in the suicide mission. He opened it gently, letting the sea take them. "Goodbye, my friend," he whispered. "The tide has ended, but your spirit remains." The wind carried the ashes out to sea. The sun rose higher, reflecting gold upon the waves. And for a moment, the ocean seemed to pause. Then, as always, it moved on. Nishina turned back to the base. He walked slowly, knowing that the war had ended, but his journey was far from over. The world would rebuild, and he would rebuild with it, carrying the memories of those who never returned. For the men of the I-47, the war was over. But the tide, the endless, silent, relentless tide, would forever remember.